talking quarterbacks and NFL draft with Adam Peters, general manager of the Washington Commanders, on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, you will get text messages from me, including news, analysis, inside information, one-on-one messaging, and bonus content. In fact, Locked On Commanders insiders were the first to hear from me that we were going to be hearing from Adam Peters on this episode of Locked On Commanders. And we're going to hear from Adam Peters on another episode of Locked On Commanders this week, because he said a lot of things. No hashtags, no apps, none of that stuff. Just one-on-one text messages with me. Again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders and text me today. I'm David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, everydayers, I appreciate your continued support for the program. On today's episode, we're going to talk about quarterback Marcus Mariota as a mentor for whatever young quarterback we presume is about to land in Washington. And to get to that, we're going to talk about the NFL draft with general manager Adam Peters. But we start with a quarterback conversation with Adam Peters from Orlando, Florida, the site of the league meetings.
Why Marcus, and how serious was the conversation about a Darnold or Jacoby or somebody else like that?
Yeah, Marcus, obviously he's been in the league a long time. He's won a lot of games. He's won playoff games. So knowing him he has a great relationship with Brian Johnson, who put in a great word for him. And so understanding what he's all about and the type of person he'd be in that room supporting whoever else is in that room. So, and the fact that he's still really good. He's athletic, he can throw it, he's smart, and he's got familiarity with what we do. So we're really, really happy to get Marcus in. We explored, I think anytime in free agency you have to explore a number of different options because you don't know who you're going to get. But we're really excited to have Marcus.
What about the decision to trade Sam?
With Sam, yeah, it wasn't an easy decision. And, even since I first started talking with you guys when I got here, he's tough. He's really tough. He's smart. He's a great kid. He's talented. He's athletic. So there's a lot of great things about Sam. Ultimately, we thought as we went through that process, we talked with his representatives. We let him know what we were doing, throughout it all. And once we decided as an organization that we're going to explore a trade, we got some good interest. And ultimately, Seattle was really excited to get him. Him and his agent is Bruce Tolner, really, really good agent and a friend of mine. And they were excited about getting to Seattle. So I think it was one of those things where it really worked out for us, it worked out for Sam, and then it worked out for the Seahawks.
When you look at the quarterbacks, does it matter to you how ready they are to come right in and play?
Yeah, you weigh that. How ready are they immediately, or how much work do they have to do, and then how can you get them there? And so, with the guys we have in the room right now, I don't think we have to rush anybody, and so that's a great thing. Whether with Marcus in there, with Jake in there, we're not going to have to rush whoever. If we draft a guy, we wouldn't have to rush him into play right away, and that's not how we work anyway. We're going to play the person who's going to give us the best chance to win.
Is there
time for three more?
Is there a right way to develop a young quarterback, to let him sit, throw him right in? You've been parts of organizations that have gone a million different directions.
Yeah, it's the hardest thing to do in sports, I think, is evaluate and develop a quarterback. And but what you want to do is make sure you do as much as you can to let them develop. So we've built DQ did an incredible job in terms of building a great ecosystem for quarterbacks. In our building, when you have Cliff, then you have Brian Johnson, you have Tavita, and we have David Blau too. So there's 4 people right there that they'll be able to focus on the quarterback room, and it's 4 quarterbacks, right? So it's a 1-to-1 teacher student ratio. It's pretty good. But no, I think that was intentional the way we did that. And so you give yourself the best chance to develop whoever's in that room as fast as you can.
All right, so that was General Manager Adam Peters, General Manager again of the Washington Commanders, not really following, but in the midst of his first offseason as the General Manager of the Commanders. Been a busy guy. We talked a lot about the free agency, the roster building, the additions. All of that stuff is going to come up on a future episode because we just could not fit all of it into this episode. And I'm really happy to share some of these clips with you because this was not a streamed press conference. It was just a scrum with some of the media members that are here in Orlando covering the Washington Commanders. So we were able to talk to him about a lot of things. And he talked about Marcus Mariota as well. And we're going to get really in depth with Daniel Flick of FanNation coming up here, or Falcon Report rather, coming up here in just a little bit. But Adam Peters also talking about Marcus Mariota, talking about the veteran, talking about his ability to still help a quarterback room, his familiarity with Brian Johnson, one of the assistant offensive coaches, and how he's going to be able to help navigate just being a professional in the locker room. And I think that's incredibly important for a young quarterback to have as a veteran that they can lean on, who's kind of been through the ringer, been around the block a couple of times. And that's kind of the life cycle of a first-round quarterback. A lot of these first-round quarterbacks come in as the franchise savior or the franchise hero. They go through that process and they either elevate and accelerate into, being an all-time great or a franchise all-time great, what have you. But sometimes if they flame out, they go back to being maybe a backup somewhere else. Usually they get a second chance to maybe be that starter. I think Marcus kind of got that with the Atlanta Falcons. And then if that doesn't work out like it didn't for Marcus, eventually you become that wise veteran who's understood the pressure of a first-round pick. You've been through the hype. You've been through the humility. Sometimes you've been through some humiliation. You've been through the news reports, the fan reactions, the boos, the cheers, all that stuff. So you can bring a perspective that not a lot of people understand. There's not a lot of, despite the numbers that we talk about in the grand scheme of people and humanity, there's not a lot of first-round quarterbacks out there. There's not a lot of people who understand what that really feels like. So having a guy like that in the room, extremely valuable. And then Adam Peters also goes on to talk about that. Look, if Marcus Mariota has to play, they got confidence in his abilities still. So, that's going to be something that a lot of people would debate, but coming from the team anyway, they do that. Talk about trading Sam Howell as well. That was something that not necessarily completely out of the blue. I think maybe the timing of it and how quickly it happened after Marcus Mariota arrived and signed his contract, maybe took some people by surprise. But you hear him talk about getting the right situation for Sam Howell, getting the right compensation for Sam Howell. This wasn't something where there's we just got to get rid of this guy no matter what. It was more so a situation of, look, we got a good deal. We got a good offer. It's a good situation for Sam, good situation for the Seahawks, good situation for the Washington Commanders. And that's why the move was made. But you're very complimentary on the way out as well. No need to rush a rookie quarterback. And I think that's something that's really important to hear from Adam Peters and something that, believe me, Dan Quinn is going to get asked about Tuesday morning at his breakfast roundtable scrum with the media members here in Orlando, because time and time again, we have seen NFL franchises, honestly, the Atlanta Falcons just did. You talk about Marcus Mariota, they put Desmond Ridder on the field, I believe, too soon for when he was ready. Now, certainly, in the initial stages, kind of looked a little bit better than maybe everybody expected him to. But once it was just fully him, he didn't have that safety net. He didn't have that veteran behind him. You kind of saw that he was just a little bit too much in the deep end on his own, not really able to kind of handle that whole thing. So you really like hearing Adam Peters talk about not having to rush a rookie quarterback. Again, we'll talk to Dan Quinn about that probably on Tuesday. And whenever that pick is made and whoever that is, I'm sure it'll come up again. And it reminded me of something. I actually got the opportunity to speak to Cincinnati Bengals head coach Zach Taylor on Monday morning when the AFC had their breakfast meetings with head coaches for the media. And I wanted to talk to Zach specifically because having his success with Joe Burrow, and I know Joe's been injured a couple times, and that's kind of, delayed things or kind of subdued the progress the Bengals and even Joe Burrow himself been able to make. But there's no doubt that when Joe Burrow is healthy, obviously they go to the Super Bowl in his second season, those things like that. Joe Burrow is the real deal. So I asked Coach Taylor what it took, from an organizational standpoint to really kind of nurture that young, exciting quarterback. He mentioned patience, communication, and honesty. And right now you're already hearing Adam Peters preach patience. You're hearing him talk about communication, everybody being on the same page, everybody understanding the mission. And then honestly, that's the part that's going to come after the draft. The quarterback's got to be honest with coaches. Coaches got to be honest with the quarterback. So we'll see if all those parts fit. But so far, it looks like anyway, you've got two of the three. Speaking of the NFL draft, that's the next big phase in this offseason. Adam Peters was asked a few questions on the NFL draft, trading back, not trading back, what he's looking for, how they're going to approach it in April. And we're going to have that for you coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by GameTime, who says you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, and comedy and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their best price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They've even got last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, all kinds of deals for you to buy tickets to any kind of event in your area. GameTime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind. They even have tickets right up to the start of the event, in some cases an hour after the event begins. The GameTime guarantee always means you're going to get the best price, so take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Continuing now in today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Every day, make sure you come back tomorrow. Surely we're going to have some stuff from Dan Quinn. Probably have a little bit more from Adam Peters as well. So come back for all of that. In the meantime, are you tuning into Fox Sports or ESPN on your television all day? Well, do you have to turn it down when all the shouting begins? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or for free on the Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Continuing now to hear from your general manager of the Washington Commanders, Adam Peters, specifically talking about the NFL draft, which of course is going to lean into the quarterback as well, but from a draft-focused angle. So here's more of Adam Peters.
When you were with the Niners, you were parts of big trades up and big trades back. When you look at that number 2 overall pick, how do you balance the player you can get there versus the haul you could get for it if you're trying to build through the draft?
Yeah, it's a really it's a big decision, obviously, but I think just like anything we do, it's about what's best for us, right? So if the best thing for us is to stand pat, then we'll stand pat. But you're always going to listen to all the different possibilities, trading up, trading back, no matter where you're at. Pick 36, 40, 67, 70, 800. So you're always going to look, okay, what are the best things for us? Weigh all the different possibilities and make the best decision you think for us at the time.
Whether you're going to tell us or not, do you know right now what you want to do?
Now we still have a lot of it. We have a month till the draft today, yeah, right. So it doesn't sound like a long time, but you get a lot of information in that month, and there's still some of the guys we haven't seen still in person. So we'll go out and do that next week, see a couple more quarterbacks, and then we'll do visits with them. We'll do Zoom calls. We'll do a lot of different things. So we're far from our answer.
When you're at these pro days, what do you care about? Like, what are you looking for?
You get a lot of information at these pro days. It's obviously you get to see the person in the flesh, for lack of a better term, up close and personal. See them work out, whether it's a tackle doing a pass set or punching the bag. You can feel them punching the bag if you're this close, which you can't really see or feel on tape. But then, aside from the player evaluation, the people you'd speak with, so you get a chance to talk to different people on that staff, talk to different people in the NFL, you get a lot of information by doing that. And whether it's on that player, whether it's on a player that they played against, the player they coached before, all that. So it's a really, really valuable tool where you do it and you don't realize how valuable it is until the end of the week when you're kind of aggregating all the information. Like, gosh, we got a ton of information. This was a great week. And that's what last week was.
Have you gotten any clarity? You've talked about you want to know what everybody else is doing. It seems like folks are starting to draw a conclusion for the Bears at number 1. Do you allow for a conclusion to be drawn there and really start to focus on what's going to be available at 2?
Yeah, I think you got to be prepared for anything. I can't assume that they're doing, they're drafting a certain guy at number 1. So, because if you do that and then they don't, then you're like, oh shoot. But so you always have to prepare for everything. Prepare like any options open. And so, regardless of how much information that you have that says one thing leading up to it, you don't know until that card's turned in.
Dan said, I think the NFL Network the other day that you could probably fair to say you can envision you guys taking a quarterback with a where to ask you. But when did you? I guess we can start with go with that. Like, is what were you at, like, sort of on this the idea of trading down? Obviously, anything is possible, but is that something you would actively seek, or?
I think just like I hate to sound like a broken record here, but we're gonna do whatever we think's best for the team. So whether that's any of those different options, we have two quarterbacks on the roster right now with Jake and with Marcus. So you want to go to camp with 4. So we're gonna add 2 one way or the other. So however that happens, that's what we're gonna do.
Do you go through I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, just to follow up on that, when he says fair to say you can envision a quarterback, when for you in this process did you think to yourself, when did you start envisioning that a quarterback was probably something that was going to be in the cards?
I think really at any position, you want to make that room as strong as it can and as competitive as you can. So whether it's quarterback or, center, guard, whatever it is, you're always looking to add and make sure that you have competition in every room. That's something that Dan preaches all the time. So with 2 in the room, you're going to get 2 more and hopefully make that room as strong and as deep as possible.
How much of your offseason moves has been about creating maximum flexibility for yourself during the NFL draft weekend?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And yeah, you always want to do that. You never want to get in a situation where you're drafting for need, and we don't ever want to do that. So a lot of that was the moves that we made is so we don't have to do that. Come in with a team where you think you feel ready to play, and then you can draft the best player available. And that's so. I feel really good. Our guys did an incredible job of getting out and getting as many guys as possible that fit what we do. And so that makes our job easier in the draft, where we can go ahead and pick the guys that we think are going to be the best commanders.
How much is it?
One more.
You can each do one.
Okay. I would say, how hard is it to not fall in love with one of the quarterbacks at this point? I know, you kind of went through this with the coaching search, where you just kind of went through the process. But is it sometimes hard to not fall in love with that guy? And how do you kind of divorce yourself from not doing so? Unless he's that good, of course.
Yeah, it's funny. Like with anything, when you're interviewing anybody, whether it's quarterback or coach or whatever, you just get a chance to really get to know these people, and you really like them. I don't know. That's just kind of how it goes. That's how I am anyway. Maybe I'm a sucker, but that's why it's good to have a great process and to go be thorough with your process and not make snap judgments and have recency bias. Who the last person you talk to, he's my favorite. So going through the whole process, like we were saying, all the way up to draft day, and making the best decision with all that information and trying to be as unbiased as possible.
All right, once again, that was your general manager of the Washington Commanders, Adam Peters, talking about NFL draft things, right? First and foremost, balancing trade value and getting draft capital in a trade and getting that king's ransom people always talk about versus the player, the value of the player that you can draft. And Adam Peters kind of focusing on doing what's best for the Washington Commanders. And we've talked about that a few times here on the episodes recently. You talk about doing what's best and basically making the right decisions for the right reasons, right? Don't just take a player at number 2 because you have the second overall pick and, well, you'll never get a chance at a franchise quarterback again, so you got to take one. No, you don't. If you don't love the kid, if you don't think that the prospect is the right fit, if you don't think that he's the right fit for what is going on in your organization, you do not have to take him, to be quite honest with you. Now, when you look at, let's say Caleb Williams is off the board, you got Jane Daniels, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy. Is there a pretty good chance that one of those dudes is going to fit what the Washington Commanders are trying to do? Absolutely. So I think that's why you end up going with the pick. But again, you don't just do it because it's the thing to do. Still evaluating options for the NFL draft. This kind of takes us back to a conversation every day as we started having back in January, where so many people are so sure of what the only answer and the one answer and the right answer is to do. And I just kind of always lean on, look, the guys who are doing this for a living, the guys who have been doing this for a living, they don't make these decisions. They don't really finalize these decisions. Sometimes 72 hours till the draft. Sometimes it's draft night when they actually finalize these decisions. There's a lot of work that goes into this, a lot of research, a lot of analysis on the person and the player. So just, I think it's a good exercise to remember this time of year that we don't always have to rush to conclusions as quickly as maybe some people want us to. And the value of pro days, we look at the scouting combine and some of these quarterbacks didn't throw. Caleb Williams didn't throw. J.J. McCarthy did. Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr. certainly already put some of their talents on display, but some of these other guys didn't. And they're getting to talk to those players, see them throw in person for the first time sometimes. Every single one of them, some of these GMs, some of these scouts have gone to games, things like that. But for the most part, the coaches specifically, they're getting their first real look at this guy on the field. And I think Adam Peters brought up a really good point, getting to talk to the staff members, talk to the teammates, maybe talk to some of the student managers and stuff like that. And also, hey, look, if you played against the top prospect that we're looking at, how is this kid on the field? How is this guy to go up against as an opponent. We heard Dan Quinn talk about when he hired Cliff Kingsbury. He said, well, something that I really knew about Cliff was going up against him was really hard to handle his offense. So obviously it's kind of if you can't beat him, have him join you in this situation for Dan Quinn. So I think he made a lot of good points there. Some interesting stuff from Adam Peters about the quarterback and the NFL draft coming up. We got more conversations from him. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, who wants you to say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a number one seed, it is time to go dancing on America's number one sports book. Right now, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Whatever you want to bet on at FanDuel, you can do it with those $200 in bonus bets as long as your first $5 bet wins. With the NCAA tournament raging forward, the UConn men are still favorites to win out of the men's bracket. The South Carolina women currently favorites. I know there's some women's NCAA tournament action happening as I'm recording this episode. So as I'm recording this episode, South Carolina women still favored to win the whole thing over there. Of course, in the NFL, the 49ers are favored to win Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans, Louisiana. The Chiefs are the second favorite, highest odds team out of the AFC, and the Washington Commanders, one of the lowest odds teams to win the Super Bowl. But that's okay for right now. You can also bet on Super Bowl matchups, Chiefs versus 49ers, Chiefs versus, Dallas Cowboys, if you think that's going to happen. Whatever it is, you can bet on that also at FanDuel. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets or your favorite NFL futures. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NFL. He did mention at the end of the press conference, Sam Portier of the Washington Post asked him about Jonathan Allen's status, and he said at this time they're not interested in trading John Allen. I know that's been a question that a lot of you have had, so it looks like at least right now, John Allen will be a part of this team moving forward, something we'll continue to monitor, of course, but it was put out there. I asked him about Jamin Davis's fifth-year option as well. We'll actually hear kind of that full answer later on in the week, but I'll just tell you now that he also said they haven't made a decision on the fifth-year option either. I've already made a decision on the fifth-year option. I don't think they're going to take it, but again, I can do that this early. He's going to take his time and do that a little bit later. Some rule changes happened on Monday at the league meetings. There's more rule changes to be voted on Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. But on Monday, the league did vote to ban the hip drop tackle. Now, it's not just all hip drop tackles are banned, but basically what they're banning is, quote, when a defensive player, quote, unweights himself by swiveling and dropping his hips up and or lower body, landing on and trapping the runner's legs at or below the knee. So the key there is that the player has to come off the ground, lift their weight, but then also land on the legs of the ball carrier or the knees, below the knees of the ball carrier. So if they don't land on the backs of the knees or below the knees, then it won't be a penalty. At least it's not supposed to. Another rule change came through for third challenges. It used to be that teams had to get both of their challenges correct in order to earn that third challenge. Now, if a team wins even one of those challenges, they have a third eligible. There are no fourth challenges. So that's an adjustment coming into the new year. And then a rule for the change of possession plays. So on change of possession plays, basically the rule is changing that the other change or that in situations where there's a change of possession, but a foul is committed by both teams on a play that results in the change of possession, the rule allows for enforcement of a major foul like unnecessary roughness by the offense prior to a change of possession. Previously, major fouls committed by the offense in the change of possession were ignored. So if a personal foul is committed and then the defense gets a turnover, interception, fumble recovery, what have you, that offensive personal foul will still be enforced. That's basically the crux of the rule. So getting back to the quarterbacks real quick to wrap up today's episode, Daniel Flick of Falcon Report comes through to talk to us more about Marcus Mariota, the mentor. So we always talk about Kirk Cousins, obviously another Washington reunion coming up on the schedule here this season, but the Commanders themselves have a quarterback decision to make. Let's take Caleb Williams off the board. And I think everybody's going to ask this question. So let's take Caleb Williams off the board. The assumption is that he's going to go to the Chicago Bears. If you're looking at Dan Quinn, you're looking at the Commanders. Like I said, you do write about the team for here and there. Where do you think the Commanders should go quarterback-wise?
I think Jaden Daniels would be a phenomenal fit there, a phenomenal pick. I think about Cliff Kingsbury and some of the QBs that he's had success with in his past, in college and the NFL. Obviously, I kind of think about Mahomes, and a lot of people point to Kyler Murray and just some of the guys that he's worked with. You think about a real level of mobility. And again, I think it's not like you're going to get a statue in Drake May, right? Like, he can move, and a lot of people don't really talk about that part of his game. But I still think that the athleticism, the arm talent that you get in Jayden Daniels, the playmaking, the leadership. Again, I've heard a lot of good things about his leadership from past teammates, and the relationships that he's able to create, I think Quinn will fall in love with. Yeah. And I think that's something that can really win him over. I think that the athleticism, the playmaking part of it that he brings is so special. And again, it's not that May isn't bringing that. It's just that I think what Jayden brings that a little bit level higher. And in those, it's kind of a trade-off, right? Because you can't get everything, right? Like you can't get everything all good. Everything's just perfect, but I still think with what Quinn and what Cliff Kingsbury are going to prioritize, I tend to think that the athleticism, the arm talent of Jayden Daniels will ultimately end up being the most important part in that conversation. And again, he can just really extend plays. And I think that's something that in Atlanta, you saw Quinn had a very immobile quarterback in Matt Ryan. And I think having that idea of like, hey, we can open this up a little bit more is probably going to be very intriguing to him. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hear Dan Quinn talk about explosiveness. That's what he wants from his team, just in general, not just offense, defense, but his team in general. And then Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, Jayden Daniels kind of fits that mold. Whether it's Jayden, whether it's J.J. McCarthy, whether it's Drake May or anybody else, they're going to need a mentor, right? Young quarterbacks always need a mentor in the league. Marcus Mariota is the current QB1 in Washington, right? By default, if anything else. You have experience watching him as well with the Atlanta Falcons, and I've had some Commanders fans already come through, Daniel, and kind of say, how is Marcus Mariota going to be the mentor to a rookie quarterback when as soon as he got pulled in Atlanta, he bailed on Desmond Ridder? So we were having a little bit of a conversation about that. So tell the people what you remember about Marcus Mariota in general and that situation, especially when he separated himself from the team. Yeah, Marcus Mariota was a very high character individual. For me with Mariota, the first thing that kind of comes to mind, he'll be very involved within that Washington community, a very high character individual. The thing a lot of people miss with what happened and the timing of everything when he left Atlanta is he had just had a very newborn child enter the picture. He was injured. I think he had a second look at a foot or knee injury that had kind of sprung up that he played through throughout the year. The way that the exit kind of happened was not what anybody in the organization wanted, obviously, but he did have his reasons. He had valid reasons that I think you can look at and you can respect them. And I think a lot of people in that room kind of recognize that. And I think that's important. The other part of it is that when Mariota was there, he was a very impactful mentor. He was a very impactful leader. Him and Ridder had a very good working relationship with each other. I recall last year several times when you'd have Ridder mention, like, hey, I learned this from Marcus, and I learned how to watch film. I learned how to, read opponents and how they'd attack me and things of that nature. Just that process of learning how to be a pro. I think Ridder learned a lot from. And, again, you could kind of see when he took over, he was very complimentary of the job that Marcus did in terms of that process of helping prepare him for that moment, because that was not something that, as you kind of know, and we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, Ridder was not necessarily ready to play right away, but he was a capable, competent quarterback by the end of his rookie year. Probably had a schedule in part because of the help that I think Mariota helped provide him throughout that time there.
Awesome. So that's a take right from Falcons Beat, right? Daniel Flick, Falcons Beat reporter for Falcon Report. Make sure you're checking that out. Make sure you're checking out everything he does. He also shows up every once in a while there in Freeman on Locked On Falcons. So we'll synergize everything that we got going on here. So Daniel, appreciate your time, brother.
Appreciate you, man.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap up this episode of Locked On Commanders. Coming up tomorrow, we got more from Orlando, Florida at the NFL Annual League meetings. In the meantime, you got questions or comments, just throw them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders Insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to do that. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view today and every day. Every day, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind. We'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.